Welcome to this post-disaster needs assessment and disaster recovery framework training jointly organized by the UNDP and the RRMC in collaboration with the EU delegation as well as the FAO. Capacity Development Program is the result of the joint declaration in 2008 on post-crisis assessments and recovery planning between the United Nations Development Group, the European Union and the World Bank, permitting the organizations to collaborate and to use common assessment and recovery planning approaches in post-crisis settings, including disaster situations. Since the signature of the agreement, the three partners have jointly prepared the post-disaster needs assessment procedural and technical guidelines and the disaster recovery framework guide, on which our participants will be trained in the course of the next 5 days. The vulnerability of Mauritius as a small island developing state is largely recognized as one and all, and also in the United Nations Development Program, country program for the period 2017-2020. It is therefore important, in the view of the UNDP, to build local capacity to address issues in the post-disaster context. We are privileged to have today in our midst very highly qualified experts in delivering this training. And so I would like to encourage all participants to be present for the maximum of the 5 days so as to benefit fully from the training which will be delivered. I would like to close by just recalling that this training is made possible by funding from the Adaptation Fund under the Climate Change Adaptation in the Coastal Zones of Mauritius project, which started in 2012 with $9 million USD funding, which is the biggest adaptation-driven project in Mauritius so far, and under which disaster risk reduction is a key component. Thank you for your attention.
I'm pleased to address you today on the launch of this training workshop on post-disaster needs assessment and disaster recovery framework for Mauritius. In 2008, the United Nations Development Group, the European Union and the World Bank signed a joint declaration on post-crisis assessments and recovery planning. With this declaration, they committed to collaborate and harmonize post-crisis frameworks to support post-disaster needs assessments and recovery planning. Since the signature of this agreement, the UN, World Bank and the European Union have jointly developed the post-disaster needs assessment guidelines and the disaster recovery framework guides. Both of these were officially launched at the Sendai World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. The main goal of these tools is to assess the full extent of the disaster's impact, define the needs for recovery, and in so doing serve as the basis for designing a recovery strategy and implementation plan. The post-disaster needs assessment looks ahead to restoring damaged infrastructure, livelihoods, services, governance, and societal systems. It includes an emphasis on reducing future disaster risks and building resilience. This is particularly relevant to Mauritius and Rodrigues, which face natural hazards such as cyclones and flash floods. Today, the European Union is very pleased to partner with the UN, World Bank, and the government of Mauritius in organizing this training workshop. It will enable technical experts to be ready for carrying out comprehensive post-disaster needs assessments and linking them to realistic disaster recovery frameworks. By doing this, communities will recover quickly from the natural hazards. I hope that through this training, government officials will take the advantages of applying a standardized approach and methodology to conduct post-disaster needs assessments, formulate a recovery strategy, and plan for its successful implementation. We must make sure that post-disaster recovery processes are used as opportunities to promote resilient development. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the importance of strengthening resilience throughout recovery efforts featured at the World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in Sendai. Many of us there advocated for recognition of the importance of resilient recovery in the Sendai framework. So it doesn't come as a surprise that the European Union is a key partner in the Indian Ocean region to support resilience. One of the projects funded by the European Union and implemented by the Indian Ocean Commission, called Islands, supports the mainstreaming of the Sendai framework into regional actions and policies. Under the project, a regional platform for financial protection against the risk of natural disasters was set up, which brought together stakeholders from the member states of the Indian Ocean Commission region around the important theme of disaster risk reduction. And this is not a once-off initiative by the European Union, as we are soon going to launch a new program in this field. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, our goal is to see that actions follow words and that recovery efforts around the world, including here in Mauritius, are guided by decisions which take into account existing socio-economic vulnerabilities and strengthen the capacities of people to protect themselves and their livelihoods. In the aftermath of disasters, affected countries need to invest significant resources to address recovery needs. These should be guided by a comprehensive assessment that estimates damages and losses and identifies the needs of the affected population. This post-disaster needs assessment is the first step towards developing a holistic recovery program that promotes equity and inclusion. Recovery and reconstructions are not just about getting back to business as usual. Simply rebuilding will only replicate the conditions which make communities vulnerable to disasters in the first place. Indeed, recovery and reconstruction mean building back better. Whenever we look at any sector, be it agriculture, water, or transport, we need to ensure that we do not recreate risks, but that we include measures to reduce exposure to future hazards. Ladies and gentlemen, climate change is expected to increase the frequency of natural hazards, thereby further increasing disaster risk. In December this year, the COP24 will be a key political moment, the first opportunities in Paris to look at our collective efforts to limit global warming and what we have done concretely in terms of delivering on the commitments made to tackle climate change. Today, more than ever, the European Union is committed to lead the way and accelerate the global transition to low-emissions, climate-resilient future. In Mauritius, the European Union remains a solid and reliable partner in climate action. We work with the government and other stakeholders in support of the implementation of the nationally determined contribution that Mauritius presented at COP21 in Paris. We have also embarked on an important work to establish a high-level political dialogue on climate change. This political dialogue will allow us to discuss how we can better work together for the implementation of the Paris Agreement. In conclusion, let me emphasize that it is unlikely that the flash floods that Mauritius and Rodrigues experienced early this year will be the last natural hazard to hit both islands. If that is taken into account in the recovery efforts now, Mauritius and Rodrigues will be much better equipped to anticipate and to prevent the worst impacts of a similar shock in the future. Building back better for a successful and resilient recovery also requires strong partnerships. It has to be a joint effort of the government, international partners, NGOs, and most important, the affected communities themselves, always including women and girls and the marginalized groups. The European Union is committed to playing its part in these efforts to support resilient recovery in Mauritius and Rodrigues. I thank you for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, On behalf of UN Resident Coordinator and UNDP representative, Mrs. Christine Umutoni, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this post-disaster need assessment training, which is co-organized by the UN agencies and the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Center, falling under the responsibility of the Ministry of Social Security, National Solidarity, and Environment and Sustainable Development. As Mariana said, the Post-Disaster Need Assessment, PDNA, was first conceptualized 10 years ago in 2008 as a result of tripartite agreement between the UN Development Group, the World Bank, and the European Union as an effort of harmonizing post-crisis assessment and recovery planning. The methodology and training materials of the PDNA have been developed over the period of 10 years and provide to be a reliable tool to assess the loss of disaster event. So, since 2008, when this started, over than 50 PDNA have been conducted globally in response to disaster events. Ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of this PDNA workshop is to inform high-level management and technical staff from the Mauritian government of the benefit of applying a standardized approach and methodology to conduct PDNA, formulate a recovery strategy, and plan for its successful implementation, and thus enhance the resiliency of the country to potential disaster. The increased frequency of climate events around the world, including the SIDS, confirm that Mauritius is highly vulnerable to the impact of climate change. And the UNESDR estimates the amount or the impact economic of loss. It is estimated between 250 to 300 billion annually. You can imagine how this amount is too high. And in Mauritius, the loss amount is estimated to 7 million per year. This also is not a small amount. The tragic flag flood event of 2013 remains a stark example of this. With climate change, those events will become even more common and severe. Natural hazards by themselves may not necessarily cause disaster. It is the combination of both exposure and vulnerability with a hazard event that results in disaster. Making Mauritius more prepared and resilient to the threat of future disaster will therefore be critical for sustainable development. Of course, it is imperative whenever we talk of PDNA and disaster risk reduction to remember that we are today working within the ambit of the Sendai framework of disaster risk reduction, which has a strong emphasis on disaster risk management and preparedness for disaster as opposed to disaster management. You will learn in the coming day, in this training, that the PDNA process also provides guidance to long-term resilience building to ensure that previous calamities do not happen again. Ladies and gentlemen, as we speak now, the disaster risk reduction experts from Asia and the League of Arabic States are also meeting in Tunisia to take stock of the progress of the implementation of the commitment to reduce disaster risk under the Sendai workshop. It is also good to recall that this training is incidentally almost coinciding with the International Day of Disaster Reduction, normally set up for 16 October. And the theme of this year is reducing disaster economic loss. Ladies and gentlemen, the UN remain committed to support the national government in the implementation of the Sendai framework. But effective implementation requires the buy-in of the national and local actors, the international community, and the provision and acquisition of the knowledge and skills to make disaster risk reduction a core part of policy, governance, and practice. In this regard, I wish to commend the government and the NDRRMC in particular for the keen interest in pursuing effort to build resilience in the specific case by providing the DPNI training to such large a number of potential resource persons as possible. I furthermore commend the government of Mauritius for keeping disaster risk reduction a key focus area in its journey to the resilience. I am encouraged and recognize the sense of the responsibility shown by you who are attending this training, hoping that the skills and knowledge you will acquire here will be felt for generations to come. Before I conclude, ladies and gentlemen, let me take this opportunity to welcome our trainers from the various agencies, namely Cecilia Aipira from UNDP, Ricardo Zapata from European Union, Breda Lazarus, expert from Food and Agriculture Organization, and Ramraj Narasimhan from UNDP Nepal. Thank you very much for your presence. I would also like to thank the organizing team from UNRRMC and the UNDP, and thanks also all participants from the ministry, private sector, and other organizations, because without you, this meeting or training will not be happen. Last but not least, thank you for European Union, represented here by Ambassador Sal, the World Bank, represented here by the representative of World Bank, for your financial support for the organization of this training. Ladies and gentlemen, Mauritius is today a unique melting pot of people, language, and culture. By ensuring that the disaster risk reduction is embraced at all levels, you can help to ensure that tomorrow remains a bright and beautiful as today. Thank you very much for
Parliamentary Secretaries, Dr. Laurent Musangu, the Acting UN Resident Coordinator, Your Excellency, Mrs. Mariana Sal, the Ambassador of the European Union and Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, His Excellency Yoshizuri Sato, the Ambassador of Japan, Excellencies from embassies, high commissions, and international organizations, the Deputy Permanent Secretary of my ministry, the Deputy Commissioner of Police, Mr. Ramchern from the UNDP, heads of different participating ministries and representatives of the private sector, members of local authorities, members of the press, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me first of all to wish each and every one of you a very good morning and thank you for your presence. It's not easy to be at La Cannelle at 9 o'clock in the morning. It requires some early some early awakening, and some dire traffic to be able to reach this place. Now, indeed, it's always a pleasure to welcome participants and officials to a workshop or to a training session. And therefore, I will not derogate from the normal courtesy for welcoming each and every one of you to this post-disaster needs assessment training. Normally, whenever you come for a workshop or whenever you come to a training, it's because you intend to use this capacity building initiative, to use it. But I must say, and I hope no one will begrudge me for that, but I indeed wish that you make the best and the most of this training session, of this exercise, of this training exercise. But I must say that my utmost wish is that you never have to use what you learn. I mean, I hope that you realize why. Now, I do appreciate this already. I was so happy to learn that this initiative, when I read the documents which were sent to me, I was so happy to learn that this initiative is a product of a 2008 agreement between the UN development groups, the World Bank, and the European Union. And I was so happy that it's taken 10 years for it to come to us. It's not an insult, Madam Sal, I can assure you. It's just that God has ensured that nothing has happened to us in the last 10 years to require, whether it be post-disaster needs assessment training or disaster recovery frameworks. However, I think we are all aware that the world is experiencing those catastrophic effects of climate change. Whether you take Indonesia just a few weeks ago, whether you take the Philippines just a little bit more before, I think it is quite clear that the world is in an era of catastrophic events. And therefore, even if it is my utmost wish that we never have to use this, what Dr. Musango called this PDNA, but I must say, I want to insist on the extensive wording, this post-disaster needs assessment framework and the disaster recovery framework. I pray God that we never have to use it. But we have to be prepared. And indeed, we have switched. This country has evolved from what we used to have as disaster management. Now we have disaster risk reduction and management system. And this is what this is all about. We have to make sure that we prevent whatever we can prevent, we adapt to that which we cannot change, and we mitigate that which can be mitigated. So to me, this is about mitigation, attenuation, prevention, and preparation to that which we cannot avoid. So from this perspective, you will appreciate why I welcome what we are doing today, and why, however, I pray that we never use what we are going to learn. One thing which I'd like to see is the amount of damage which is caused is very often termed in economic currency. But no one at all can actually measure the amount of human suffering. It is, I've never seen any attempt to try and say, I was looking at the document sent to me where I was told that the Typhoon Mangkhut in the Philippines has brought about losses, damages of about $622 million. But there is no chart yet to assess the amount of human suffering. And I think that it is unfortunate. We assess everything, poverty, sort of charts, we have all types. But look at this, and this is the one which affects people most, is the suffering. And here, we've had the good luck. I think we've been blessed. If you just take in the last 3 years, in 2016, we had the very intense tropical cyclone Fantella. It had gusts of 280 kilometers an hour. And we managed, I can't say that, we managed to avoid Fantella. In 2017, we had an intense tropical cyclone Enao with gusts of the order of 250 kilometers an hour. And when it saw Mauritius, it just decided to go away. Earlier this year, we just managed to escape Cyclone Birgitta. So you can appreciate why I am in favor of what we're doing and why I, however, hope that we'll never have to use them. I think that there's one thing which has to come out of this training workshop. Different, and I have seen it after Birgitta. After Birgitta, you have the Ministry of Social Security, which has to carry out an assessment of the consequences of the disaster which has affected the country. Then you have the Ministry of Social Integration, which has to do its own survey. Then you have the local authorities, which have to do their survey. Then you have the Ministry of Public Infrastructure, the Road Development Authority, the Traffic Road Management and Safety Unit. But each of those different entities use their own criteria and guidelines. And this is exactly what this post-disaster needs assessment and disaster recovery framework is about. We need to have a uniform set of guidelines, to be able to have the same set of criteria, to be able, first of all, to optimize the resources required after that, both human and financial, and to be able to have a clear dashboard. Because the dashboard of the Ministry of Public Infrastructure is certainly not the dashboard of my ministry. But surely, we should try to come up, and I hope that this particular training session will try to help us devise a clear dashboard which encompasses the various parameters which all of the ministries altogether should work with. What bothers me most is that, and I hope that this workshop addresses this, what bothers me most is the fact that sometimes ministries, departments, organizations work in silos. And that doesn't help whenever it comes to optimizing the use of resources, or else you have what we call overlapping jurisdictions. So apart from having the particular jurisdiction, what happens is there are gray areas where there is overlap. And if it is, that's quite funny. My experience as an institutional expert has brought me to leave some interesting occurrences. If it is an overlapping jurisdiction where there is some sort of power, then there's a fight between the entities to have this jurisdiction. But if it is a jurisdiction which brings, which has obligations, which has duties, and especially which has consequences where you can be criticized, then no one wants the overlapping jurisdiction. So I hope that this workshop also, when you work out the post-disaster needs assessment, when you work out the disaster recovery framework, that we can identify who will do what, apart from getting the dashboard. Well, I am not a member of the delegation which is here, but I just wanted to share a few of what I have seen in what is now surprisingly my 35-year experience in this field of law institutional matters. Now, what I would like to perhaps end up with is that, surprisingly, very few people know that on the 13th we will be celebrating the International Day for Disaster Reduction. So I do hope that somehow this meeting helps us to put the 13th of October on the national agenda, so that henceforth we try to make a special event of the 13th of October. Now, with these words, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure I should leave some time for you to, well, first of all, enjoy the refreshments before you start work, and therefore I will conclude by just saying that it now gives me an immense pleasure to declare the post-disaster needs assessment training officially open. Thank you for your kind attention. C'est une training session qui nous réfère, il aura une durée de 5 jours, il aura un processus qu'appelle le Post-Disaster Needs Assessment. Qui fait le Post-Disaster Needs Assessment? Parce qu'aujourd'hui, avec les conditions climatiques extrêmes qui nous préconisent avec le changement climatique, le risque de désastre est augmenté énormément. Comme on connaît, d'après le World Risk Report de 2017, l'île Maurice est le 7e pays au monde le plus exposé aux catastrophes naturelles. Donc on n'est pas capable de dire, à tant qu'un désastre est venu, il y a nous pour aider qui peut faire. D'ailleurs, aujourd'hui, nous faisons le switch du concept de disaster management pour venir vers le concept de disaster risk reduction. C'est pour ça qu'il s'impose disaster risk assessment là, d'accompagner d'une autre chose qui s'appelle le disaster recovery framework. Nous avons fini d'aider comment une autorité pour finir de développer des guidelines, des critères, pour que s'il arrive un désastre, qui m'ont espéré pas arriver, qui nous capable de dire, et il y a tout plein de choses qui disaient, le post-désastre. Il y a aussi beaucoup de faire connaître que ce processus-là, il y a un processus qui date de 2008, qui finit élaboré par la Banque mondiale, par l'UNDP, avec l'Union européenne. Et donc, nous travaillons conjointement avec ces trois organismes-là pour nous capables de préparer si arrive un problème de l'Union.
J'étais là dans le speech, on est plus de officials, tout ça là, je travaille accès d'une façon standardised.
C'est ça, l'idée qui fait nous dire post-disaster needs assessment, c'est parce qu'il nous peut dire qu'il n'est pas possible qu'il y ait un ministère de Social Security, s'il arrive un problème, il est là, après dans le terrain, il va guetter qui vous fait. Ministère Public Infrastructure, là il est à ce côté. Ministère Social Integration, il est à ce côté. Donc qui nous dit à bien faire? Il nous dit qu'il y a un seul critère monter un seul set de critères, un seul set de guidelines, et là, tout le monde allait, mais un seul dashboard, que tout le monde entre dans l'institution, tout le monde département, tout le monde ministère, sur tout ça, un dashboard là, qui travaille là, capable de faire de façon uniforme, et là qui arrive, nous optimisons nos ressources, nous optimisons nos finances, nous optimisons le coût. Trois petites choses qui sont très très importantes si il y a un désastre. Donc c'est pour ça qu'il nous dit, bien c'est comment nous sommes capables, avec sa needs assessment training là, comment nous sommes capables d'élaborer un dashboard que toute entité est capable de travailler ensemble.
Aussi dans le discours, M. le ministre, on parle de l'aspect humain, le coût humain. Qu'est-ce que tu veux dire par là?
Mais oui, c'est ça. N'importe quand il y a un désastre, là nous faisons l'exemple des Philippines, je veux dire, après le passage de sa typhoon là, fin réussi, on va dire, quantifier les dégâts à 622 millions de dollars. Mais par contre, il n'y a aucun guideline là-bas qui dit à nous quel est l'impact de la souffrance humaine. Ça paye non. Alors, ce qui beaucoup de connaître, c'est qu'il dans sa workshop qui peut faire, sa training qui peut faire là, pour non, un bon guideline de lesquels tu travailles, qui peut de sa dashboard, de sa post-disaster assessment là, c'est l'impact humain. Donc, nous tous là, dans mon discours qui est peinant, normalement dans le monde, quand on lit la presse, quand on lit un rapport. Dans Maurice aussi, nous pas dire non, il y a un critère sur l'impact humain. Mais à la dans sa training assessment qui peut faire là, sa training là, nous payons et non, un salaire là qui peut concerner dans le training.
In your speech, madam, you talk about women, girls and disfavorable persons. What were you thinking about?
Well, usually when these natural catastrophes happen, it's the marginalized communities, so women and girls, which are mostly affected. So when we talk about these post-disaster needs assessments, how to reduce the risks, how to build resilience to these communities, one needs to take into account the women and the girls. They need to be empowered and they need to be educated and raising awareness how to better tackle with these risks.
Have you been able to make the assessment since 10 years? This program is on and it is being done in 50 countries. Is there an assessment from your part? Is it working, this post-disaster assessment?
I think there has been made a lot of progress in the world in terms of post-disaster needs assessments and how to better cope with disasters and natural hazards. I think there has been tremendous progress in this field in the past years, but one must also be aware of the fact that the climate change increases the level of these natural hazards and risks, as you have seen, and small island states like Mauritius is very vulnerable to these kind of risks. And that's why I'm very happy that this workshop funded by the European Union, and we have provided a technical expert to this workshop as well, that it takes place now here in Mauritius, so that Mauritius will become even better prepared in case a risk scenario would happen here.